In the same week that we broke the story that the Albanese government is literally paying women a dead baby bonus of either $4,200 or up to $22,000 for paid parental leave if they intentionally kill their baby late in pregnancy after 20 weeks. We revealed that the mainstream media ignored it, but in the same week, they pursued a story about how the Albanese government should consider introducing a Howard government-style baby bonus, a cash payment to women for delivering a live baby. Even if the mainstream media is ignoring it, there are promising signs that our campaign is gathering steam, and now a WA politician is asking difficult questions via an FOI request that the minister is not going to want to answer. All that and more, that's today on The Dr. Jo Show. Before we get into today's video, if you're new here, can I please ask that you hit the subscribe button? So last week, we broke the news via a leaked letter that I put up on X and then put on social media to show that Minister Katie Gallagher has acknowledged, now she's the Minister for Government Services, she's acknowledged that the government is paying women the stillborn parenting payment, which is for women who tragically lose their baby late in pregnancy. And that should be paid to them, I think. It is a bereavement payment. It's some form of assistance at a very difficult time in their lives. They're actually subverting that payment and using it as a cash payment for women who have late-term abortions. Now, even leaving aside the merits of whether these women should be giving payments, one of my biggest problems with this is the underhand nature of it, the fact that there's no transparency and accountability around it. We literally don't know how many of these payments are going for late-term abortions, how many women are accessing it. And so there's just so little knowledge about it. And I think it's really actually quite underhand to be using something that most Australians would believe is going for babies who die naturally, but actually using it as a dead baby bonus, as a cash payment for late-term abortions. And in this letter, the key section, it says, from Katie Gallagher's office, the eligibility criteria for the stillborn baby payment do not exclude circumstances where the stillbirth was due to a medical termination, including an intentional abortion, provided the child has been certified by a qualified medical practitioner as having been delivered and the definition of a stillborn child is met. Now, as I've explained on the show previously, a late-term abortion procedure involves delivering a stillborn child. It's the only way to get a baby out late in pregnancy. They give a child an injection into their heart of poison. The baby dies in utero. Labour is induced. The mother goes into labour and delivers her stillborn child. And so it meets the definition for the stillbirth parenting payment unless there's a carve-out for late-term abortions, unless there's a carve-out that says you cannot get this payment if you intentionally kill your child. But here is Katie Gallagher actually saying directly, no, you can get this for elective abortions, for an intentional abortion. So this is a news story because it is a significant use of our money in a way that no Australians would believe. And yet when I pitched this to several media outlets, you guessed it, they just didn't want to cover it. And on the one hand, I think with some of these editors that I'm dealing with, I think some of them possibly have had firsthand experience of abortion and they don't want to have any kind of story that kind of would make us think worse of abortion. It would stigmatise abortion. And so even if they're women, who have had early abortions in the first trimester, and I want to be clear that is just as wrong as a late-term abortion. It kills a human child. But in their mind, it's not. There's a lot of these women who, Danica DeGeorgia, for example, I don't know if she's had an abortion, but she had that debate with Liz Storer on Sky where she said, I think up to 12 weeks, it's fine for a woman to have an abortion. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It's not really a developed baby at that stage at all. But she says late-term abortion, that makes me feel sick. And so Liz and her had this back and forth. I think a lot of these women editors that I pitched this story to, Danica wasn't one of those, just so you know, but I did reach out to a few and I just got radio silence from them. And there's a part of me that wonders, do they just not want to have a story that makes that calls out this late-term abortion issue because they're concerned of how it looks for abortion as a whole? Even on the conservative side of the equation, Sky, The Spectator, the Australian, radio silence. But one particular conversation I had with Channel 7 was very interesting because they were sort of interested in the story, but ultimately they came back and said, there's no pictures. There's no pictures. We can't run a story without pictures. And, I suggested to them, you could have babies in ultrasounds, you could have pictures of Katie Gallagher. You could have pictures from the Dr. Joe show where we break this. You could have the letter, you could have women being pregnant. But ultimately they said we can't do this. And so imagine my surprise when in the same week that all of these mainstream media outlets, not one of them covered this leaked letter from Katie Gallagher's office confirming that there is a dead baby bonus in this country. All of these media outlets didn't seem to mind the lack of pictures now. They were covering the Howard government's baby bonus and why the Albanese government needed to introduce it in order to rectify declining fertility. The fact that we're literally heading off a cliff, the fact that we're way below replacement level for our population. They were all covering the fact that actually we need a baby bonus for live babies. Let's watch the Channel 7 report.
Treasurer Jim Chalmers is being urged to consider a baby bonus to try to boost birth rates. Former PM John Howard is championing the idea, originally launched by the then Treasurer Peter Costello in 2004. The scheme would put $3,000 in the pockets of new parents.
So the truth is we're having over 15,000 fewer babies every year than we once were in 2014. And yet all of these news stories, which were talking about how we need to incentivise people to have babies, none of them mention the fact that we've got skyrocketing abortion rates. We're literally killing 88,000 babies every single year. 95% of them are healthy babies because most abortions are elective. And yet that's not part of the conversation. Sky had a panel for over 5 minutes where the cost of living was talked about ad nauseum, but no one talked about the fact that we're actually killing our babies through abortion. The Daily Telegraph had a big story about the baby bonus to encourage young parents to have one for the country. And they had a big picture of Peter Costello holding lots of babies. Because remember when he was Treasurer, he famously said, women need to have one for mum, one for dad, and one for the country. And it did lead to an increase in birth rates at the time. And they quote Treasurer Jim Chalmers in the article. And it says, so they say, a spokesman for the Treasurer said, the existing package of support for parents was enough. Families are best placed to make decisions about whether they have kids and how many, he said. Our job is to make it easier where we can to support the choices families make. So for the Albanese government, if you're going to make the choice to have a dead baby because you want to have a late-term abortion, that's fine. They're going to support the choice because they'll give you $4,200 for it, or they'll even make you eligible for paid parental leave of up to $22,840. They don't want to introduce a live baby bonus, but they're very happy with their dead baby bonus, and they're allowed to keep it because nobody in the mainstream media is holding them to account. And while the mainstream media is doing their best to look the other way, pro-aborts online are actively lying to try and cast shade and doubt. So I'm just going to address a couple of them now because some of you might have been seeing these crop up in your feed. I just want to make sure that you're aware of what the facts are. The talking point that pro-aborts always go back to when it comes to late-term abortion is that these are so necessary. They're a mercy killing. They're a compassionate response to a woman who's got a baby who's going to die or is severely disabled. So they say late-term abortions and, the stillborn parenting payment, if it's used, it's only ever used for these heartbreaking situations. So, for example, Trina says, hanging your grift on the distress and grief of women who have to terminate pregnancy due to terminal abnormalities of their baby is a special kind of putrid savagery, Joanne. Please seek proper psych care for your pathological need for attention. And user 5324 said, couldn't agree more. Joanna needs serious mental health support. Her behaviour is very concerning. This is something I love about the woke left. The fact that they, go on and on and on about, the need to, be mindful of mental health and respect for the person and what they're going through, but then they're just so quick to turn around and use it as a slur against people like me, and there's just no internal consistency, is there? Anyway, similar lie from Charlie Girl 324. Joanna Howe misconstrues information. No woman deliberately aborts a late-term baby unless there are serious abnormalities. If she is successful, women will be forced to give birth to babies that have no hope for life. So even before we get into the nuts and bolts of this, I just want to make the point that a late-term abortion is not a mercy killing. It's not a compassionate response. In that situation, you've got a very sick baby in utero, and what you're doing is you're injecting that baby with poison without pain relief in a way that causes searing agony. So this is not nice for the baby. And on death row, as I tell you guys time and time again, before they inject the prisoners with digoxin or potassium chloride, which is the same chemical agent used on these babies late in pregnancy, they give the prisoners pain relief first because it is just so painful. Yet that doesn't happen late in pregnancy, and yet all of these people people online, these pro-aborts, would have you believe that it's a really nice, sanitized process. It's not. You just don't see it. These babies have no voice, so they can't talk about it. And that's why you're able to perpetuate these lies online. But getting to the nuts and bolts of this, because, maybe they're correct, but I think you know the answer. First point, Services Australia, there is nothing on their website or any guidance from Centrelink which says that you can only get the stillbirth parenting payment if you're killing a baby, if you have a stillborn baby that was going to die anyway. So first of all, Services Australia and Centrelink don't even properly ever say that this is for abortion. We know that it's for abortion. We know that it's for stillborn babies that are deliberately induced dead because we can see that they meet the criteria. But there's no criteria about the fact that these babies have to have been seriously sick, seriously disabled, or not going to survive. And in fact, Katie Gallagher's letter just says it's for intentional abortion. So there's nothing there that restricts access to this payment for babies who have severe abnormalities, which is what these pro-aborts are saying online. And then the second point is the majority of late-term abortions kill healthy babies, perfectly healthy babies, in situations where the mum's life is not at risk. This is the biggest lie that the abortion industry and the media perpetuates about late-term abortion. They say it's medically necessary, and yet if we see the data from the states that release it, it's very clear that these are often elective abortions. So for example, in Victoria in 2020, 129 healthy babies were killed for a psychosocial reason. So mum is completely physically healthy and the baby is physically healthy too. So there is no reason to kill that baby, no reason at all. And even if the mum's life was at risk at that gestation, so we're talking after 23 weeks, the correct response is to remove that baby alive via an emergency C-section. That can be done in an hour. If you want to save a mum's life, you're going to want to do this quickly. You don't take the time of a late-term abortion, which takes at least 24 to 48 hours and has no medical benefits for the mother. But the South Australian data, which we now have 2.5 years of, is even clearer. In that state, 75 to 80% of late-term abortions kill completely healthy babies. They have no fetal anomaly and the mum's life is not at risk. So for example, we can see that there's actually been 79 babies killed in this 2.5-year period who are perfectly healthy. This is, as I said, 75 to 80%. The overwhelming majority of late-term abortions kill healthy babies. So if you combine all of this together, you can see that on the one hand, there is nothing in the guidance from Services Australia or Centrelink which says you can't access this stillbirth parenting payment if you have a baby who's intentionally killed but was perfectly healthy. There's nothing to say that you can't get it. And then secondly, the majority of babies killed late in pregnancy from the South Australian data are perfectly healthy with mums in non-life-threatening circumstances. So that lie that they're saying that, oh, well, this isn't for, healthy babies, it's just for really, really sick babies and it's like a mercy payment, that just doesn't stack up when you look at the facts. Another way that the pro-aborts online are trying to throw shade and doubt on this question of whether the stillbirth parenting payment can be used for women who have intentional late-term abortions is to suggest that the Centrelink form, which requires details of the hospital and of the funeral home, are somehow insurmountable stumbling blocks for a woman who's trying to get the stillbirth parenting payment for a late-term abortion. So for example, How She Lies says, question 41 of the form, women have to fill out for the payment. It specifically states they need to contact details of the hospital and funeral home to verify the body. Do you want a screenshot? Not only does this person seem to not have a basic grasp of the English language or any of the rules of grammar, they also seem to have no idea of what it takes to access this payment. They're being deliberately obtuse. I think they're deliberately trying to lead people astray, because even if it's true that a person claiming the cash payment has to provide the hospital and the funeral home, which I want to be clear, that's probably not true in every state and territory. For example, in South Australia, it is perfectly legal to have your baby thrown in the bin as medical waste after a late-term abortion. And in fact, the Births and Deaths Registration Act in South Australia explicitly excludes stillborn babies in a late-term abortion. So it says, you've got to register stillborn babies normally, natural stillbirths, they need to be registered and they need a death certificate as well as a birth certificate. But, if there's a baby that's killed via termination of pregnancy after 20 weeks, well, they're just products of conception. And so, in South Australia, we know for a fact you don't need to have a funeral for these babies. But even if what they're saying is true in the other states, it's not really that hard to achieve. So first of all, I'm not actually certain that you need to have the funeral home listed because part of the advice from Services Australia when saying to women, how do you access this payment? They say, get your documents ready to claim. We'll tell you which documents you need. The doctor or midwife who was at the birth must complete the declaration. If you can't give us the declaration, you can give us a letter on hospital letterhead from the doctor or midwife who was at your baby's birth. It should include your full name, the place and date of birth, the baby's sex, the baby's weight, the gestation period. So it doesn't say anything about a birth certificate, but it also doesn't say anything about the funeral home. Now, this isn't a very hard hurdle for a woman who's had a late-term abortion to meet, because obviously she's had it at a hospital. It's not like she's having this in her backyard. It's legal up to birth to have an abortion. So this is a woman who has been hospitalised. She's had midwives and doctors supervising this whole process. There is someone at the hospital who's done this abortion, who's killed this baby, who is going to sign this form. So this is not a hard thing to achieve. And then even if you did have to list a funeral home's details, this also doesn't actually preclude anything, because it's not like Centrelink is going to ring the funeral home and say, did this baby get buried by your funeral home? I don't think that that's how this thing works. You could just list a funeral home. And in fact, Red Nose, which gives advice about this, says, sometimes you may be asked if you would like the hospital to organise the baby's burial for you. They're giving advice to women who've had stillborn babies. They don't differentiate between intentional abortions and natural stillbirths. I think they're talking exclusively to women who've had natural stillbirths. But what they do write is it is a legal requirement that the body of a stillborn baby or a baby who dies in the newborn period be buried, cremated, placed in a mausoleum or a permanent resting place. To this end, you may choose to create a personal or individual service to mark your baby's life in the form of a funeral or memorial service. Alternatively, you may wish for the hospital to handle the arrangements. And they write, sometimes you might be asked if you would like the hospital to organise the baby's burial for you. When the hospital organises the baby's burial, there's usually little or no cost to you. However, often you and family members cannot be present and your baby may be buried in a grave with others. In this instance, you are usually not invited to place any type of plaque or memorial stone on your baby's grave. So what we can see here is that actually even within hospitals, there is provision for these stillborn babies, whether natural stillbirths, which are always tragedies, and then intentional abortions, but which are tragedies of a different kind, because you have a baby that should really have lived. There was no reason for that baby to die. And hospitals can do these arrangements. So even if you have to list the funeral home on the document, presumably Centrelink is aware that many hospitals dispose of these babies. And I've seen that and I've heard that from hospitals, that is something that they do. But even if you had to pay for the funeral, because a lot of these pro-abort liars online, what they're saying is, oh, well, this is a payment that's just purely for women, to help them cover the costs of a funeral, which are really, really expensive. Well, remember, at a bare minimum, this payment is $4,200, but it could be $22,000 if you get the paid parental leave for a stillborn. And, just even a quick Google suggests that a funeral for a stillborn baby in Australia is between $500 to $1,500. So, Templeton Family Funerals, which has an angel no attendance cremation service, does this for $1,085. So you're still left with over $3,000 as part of your dead baby bonus. So why is the mainstream media covering this up? Why are the pro-aborts online lying about it? Well, I think because they're just so keen for this story to go away, because they know that if Australians wake up to it, it's really detrimental to their cause. And even though we don't have the pro-abortion media establishment on side and they're not doing anything about it, our campaign is actually getting traction. Last week was a massive week for us. The petition now has over 44,000 signatories, which is just incredible for an online petition. It's really good to see that number rising and rising. And as I've said to you guys, I'd love to get that to 100,000. So please make sure you're sharing it. On Facebook, we've had content go to nearly 200,000 views. On Instagram, over 200,000 views just in the last week, just on this stillborn parenting payment. So this is really exciting. And you can see on this Instagram reel, people have sent this 1.9K, 1,900 times to other people, 560 comments, 352 saves. So this is really exciting that, 249,000 people viewed this video. So this shows you the power of social media. Kurt Malberg, who's a journalist and who writes as well for the Canberra Declaration, I've been working with him behind the scenes to draw attention to this. He has posted on Twitter on a thread that has literally reached nearly 1 million people online. So that shows you the power of what we're doing on socials. Even though the Australian media isn't covering this, Not the Bee, which is a news site from the US. So the Babylon Bee, you might know, it has 2.2 million followers on Instagram alone. That's a satirical news site. So they'll post things that are just parodies of what the left is doing. But then they've got this other spin-off website called Not the Bee, where it sounds like it's satirical, but it's actually true. And so we made that. And so this was their headline: report Australian government could now pay up to $22,000 to mums who abort babies after 20 weeks gestation. And they write, seriously, do we need to invade and liberate Australia? According to Kurt Malberg, an independent journalist in Australia, the government's welfare system will pay mothers good money to abort their children in cases potentially up to $22,000. So you can see there is some traction emerging, and we're actually now starting to have political impact. I had quite a few phone calls last week from various politicians from different parties, all keen to do something about that. And one of them actually has started that ball rolling. On Friday last week, Australian Christians MP from WA, Marika Grunfeld, has put in a Freedom of Information request. Now, you might remember Marika. I went down to WA earlier this year when there was a state election. Once again, the left totally dominated. But one silver lining was that Marika Grunfeld and Australian Christians got their first ever seat in the WA upper house, which is just wonderful. There's still, an upper house that's dominated by the left. But what this does do is it gives us an opportunity to draw attention to the issue of abortion, introduce bills and inquiries. We've seen how effective Alex Antic, Matt Canavan, Robbie Cutter have been in other places, Robert Borsak, John Ruddock in New South Wales. There's real potential for independent or minor party MPs to do something. And indeed, Marika Grunfeld, her first question in the parliament after being elected was about the issue of babies who survived their abortion in WA. And we still don't have an answer from the government, the Cook government on that, but that question is there, it's on notice, and they're going to have to provide an answer. So now she's asking questions again, and I had the opportunity to interview her a little while earlier about what she's doing. Let's take a look. So Marika, it's so good to see you again. And I don't think I've had you on the YouTube channel since you've been elected to become a member of the WA Parliament. So huge congratulations on that. You're now asking questions again. They're not going to like you if you keep asking these questions. You put in an FOI request, which I'm very grateful for, because these things cost money and they take time. So it's great that you've diverted some of your staff members and resources to put in this request. It's on the stillborn parenting payment, and you're asking questions such as, from what I see, I'll flick up the request on the screen so people can see it. But essentially what you've asked is, what is the data? Like how many people are claiming this payment? How many times is it being used for intentional abortions, for when a baby's been deliberately killed and delivered stillborn? Do you even collect that data? And can it be used for paid parental leave? Like, can someone who deliberately kills their baby late in pregnancy get paid parental leave? So these are really good questions. What prompted you to ask these questions, and what are you hoping you'll find?
Well, look, obviously you've been leading in this space as well, Jo. So just based on a few of the comments you made last week, of course, finding out about these termination payments, I was shocked, and I was thinking, well, hang on, what does this data actually look like? So on the back of you sharing that letter, we thought, no, we need to jump onto this. And it also flows into a deeper issue I have with so much of the stats around abortions is, the legislation changes so much to actually limit the amount of data we have. So not only on the stuff you were talking about, but I was even asking, well, how do we know women aren't being coerced into these horrendous decisions and procedures? And the data simply is not kept and reflective of how we know how many women are even in these vulnerable positions. So that's what spurred me along. And of course, it's good we're in this fight together. So we have to support each other in that too.
Yeah, absolutely. And so once you get this data back, what would you do? And are you concerned that they'll just redact it? They won't, because I noticed in your FOI request, you said, I'm not interested in names. I don't want identities. I just want anonymized, raw, quantitative data about how much money is going to intentional stillborns, but intentional abortions. Are you worried that they just won't give you anything proper?
Look, this is going to be interesting because this is the first, FOI that we're doing of this nature. So I have no idea what they're going to come back with. We obviously ask for as much as we can, and then we can again rejig once we get an answer back. But look, I'm hoping they'd be fairly forthcoming as we're trying to make sure we're not asking for identities, we're not asking them to give us any identifiable documents. All we want is the data. And at the very least, we need to understand the numbers behind this. So if we are saying, that there's not enough support available for women, well, why have we got these exorbitant payments going out left, right and centre, yet we don't have enough care and facilitation and support available for women who are in that decision about their unplanned pregnancy? So I think as a taxpayer, we deserve to know where this money is going and how this money is being spent.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because it is a subversion of what we would expect to be the case, that you've got a vulnerable woman in a crisis or unplanned pregnancy. We would expect that we would give her some support and assistance, perhaps money. I mean, the Howard government had the baby bonus to actually help her carry that baby, and instead we're actually incentivising her to kill that baby.
Yeah. And, I understand there's a proportion of this payment that is for psychological support. And of course, that's what that payment, they say, essentially reflects. But, if we are truly pro-choice, and saying to women, hey, you've got all this information available, then we need to be giving these women all the information available. We can't keep defaulting to death and keep defaulting to abortion as an option. We need to be able to give women the full scope of the information. Of course, these payments, if it's truly towards helping women make these decisions, then that's great. Then absolutely, let's have it available. But we have to know, again, where that money's going, how much of it is allocated, and if a proportion of that is actually set aside for real counselling and real support.
I think that's right. So I think it's really good you're asking all of these questions, and let's see what comes of it. And it does take months. It takes time, doesn't it? Frustrating how slow the wheels of government move. So all of this to say, there is a momentum building to our campaign, and there's more in the pipeline. But the thing that we're really lacking is the stories, because in order to break this issue open, I have relied on the stories that people have told me. I've talked about a hospital administrator who was part of a conversation where there was a discussion in this hospital about the fact that more healthy babies were being killed late in pregnancy. The hospital had been used to babies who were severely sick being killed via abortion and then delivered stillborn. That was something that had been going on. But once the law was changed to allow abortion up to birth for any reason, there was increasingly healthy babies being killed, and midwives were very traumatized about delivering these healthy stillborn babies. And, the hospital administrator was talking about how increasingly the hospital was signing off on these forms for Centrelink so that women could access the payment. And I've talked about a midwife who also said that, she was just absolutely horrified by this woman who demanded a late-term abortion, had such a great sense of entitlement about it, killed a healthy baby, and said she was using the payment to go to Bali for a holiday. So, this is deeply disturbing stuff. It's really sick and twisted. And when I have talked to these two women in particular, and there's a little bit of other stuff that other people have told me, but the problem that I'm up against is all of these people work in the system. All of them need their jobs. And even though I've talked to them about the importance of actually blowing the whistle publicly, because we're never going to end abortion unless people start to speak up properly, it does actually take people putting their careers on the line for these babies, because otherwise we just never blow this open. Like, the other side gets all of the money, all of the awards, all of the accolades for killing babies. We're never going to end it unless we can just expose how evil that is. But there's so many disincentives to exposing it. Career and professional suicide is really the biggest one for people, the loss of income, the loss of friends. So all of this I get, but I've got a new email address called tips@drjoannahowe.com.au. So if you have a tip about this story, if you know something, you've got a document, you've got a personal story to tell, maybe you're a woman who've had a late-term abortion and you've accessed access this payment and you'd like to tell me your story, I want to hear it. Okay, so tips@drjoannahoward.com.au. It's there down below. Please send me emails if you've got any tips on this story. And what can we do in the meantime? Well, we can share this video. We can write comments below. We can like it. We can share the petition. Basically, our mission, guys, is to blow this open, to spread the word, and to make sure that every Australian knows that the Albanese government is giving a cash payment of our taxpayer money to parents who deliberately kill their healthy baby late in pregnancy. Thank you for watching, and that's today on The Dr. Jo Show.